Hi, thanks for joining us for another episode of Oklahoma Senate on Deck with Senate President Pro Tem Greg Treat. Senator Treat, glad to have you back on the podcast. It's been a while. How have you been?
I've been well. Just been busy as you have been, just trying to work through the COVID-related issues at the Capitol and get session wrapped up and all the other responsibilities we have.
The work never stops around here in the legislature. So let's get right into it today. I thought since it's been a while since we've talked here on the podcast, let's recap the 2020 session. It was an unusual, unprecedented, bizarre, strange session for one main reason, and that was the impact that COVID had. So let's get your perspective on how the session went. It started off normal, and then around mid-March, COVID impacted us in a personal way here and forced us to make some adjustments.
I remember it was just 2 years ago, there was a member of ours that had to be overseas serving his country, and we talked at that time that there was no way we would ever let people remotely vote in the state Senate. How times have changed. What is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. We had to change things around when there was a COVID outbreak, even in our own Senate body with the staff person early on. We had to react quickly, and we moved most stuff into remote committee meetings, that type of things. A lot of people, you'll hear them talk and say, session normally is around 90 days. This was only 37 days. What were they doing? A lot of those days we weren't voting, so
Right.
It didn't count as a session day.
Right.
But we were having conference calls with people all across the state, trying to make sure we got supplies where they needed to be, trying to react, trying to aid the effort of the administration, and really aid the effort of our constituents.
Right.
The medical providers. I had a lot of dentists reach out to me that didn't have equipment. Elective surgeries, people were really worried about their loved ones. So you have that, and then at the same time in Oklahoma, we had the drop worldwide on the price of a barrel of oil and MCF of gas, and you had those hit almost simultaneously. So we were scrambling around trying to make sure that we did the best job we could.
Well, I think despite the challenges, I think we adjusted well here in the Senate and in the legislature overall. The remote meetings, the virtual meetings went pretty well. I've heard good comments from folks, media, and just constituents who appreciated us trying to make sure they could follow along, and we had to do the important business.
Yeah,
of
I
the
kind of
state.
jumped on you and on our media staff, but also our IT staff to make it happen. And you and your colleagues did an excellent job of getting us prepared. You know, most of the members on the floor, we were there present voting, but we wanted to make sure we gave access to people who
Right.
couldn't. Either they were taking care of a loved one or
Right.
they had a compromised immune system themselves. And so it worked beautifully. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the Democrat leader, Senator Floyd, working with us to make that happen. But our staff adjusted. Our IT staff was up here many nights and weekends trying to make sure it worked. Of course, we had a few glitches early on.
Yeah.
Trying to make it work, and it's never going to be perfect. But to assume perfection even when we're all here in person is a faulty assumption.
Right.
It worked very well, and we were able to get the job done, able to work really well with our House colleagues, and they had a different approach. They had proxy voting, but each body did what worked best for their own institution.
And it was important because the government stayed open, stayed functioning, did what we needed to do to support the citizens of Oklahoma, and proved that in a time like this we could still do that even if we had to change and not be here in person. So
yeah, I've got to give Roger Thompson and the Appropriations Committee and staff a lot of credit, because they had to basically write 4 budgets this year. Mm-hmm. Wrote the budget early on that they'd started last July basically, and then with the barrel of oil at one day trading negative.
Yeah.
Board of Equalization changed the number on them. First, we were thinking $200 million down, then $500 million, then $1.3 billion down is what we ended up having to do.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we had been prudent in sessions prior and put back about $1 billion in total, which helped really take the situation and make it a little bit better. But, you know, you've got to have an eye to the future, too. We don't just budget and then think, just hope and pray that next year is fine.
Right.
So we had to cut some to make sure we had some money left over for next year.
But we kept areas of the budget, protected them cuts, kept their cuts smaller. One area that comes to mind is the education section of the budget. we made sure that kept our commitment there on teacher pay and the increased dollars we sent to the classroom.
That was extremely important. Their cut on paper was 2.55%, but when you look at the CARES money they're going to get
That's
and
the
other monies,
federal coronavirus relief money.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but it's gonna be a net positive. But each school district, some districts
Right.
like I have Deer Creek in my district, and they don't have as many Title I students, so we're trying to figure out how do we help there where they're adversely impacted. There's still some things to work through, but overall, very proud of the legislature and the budget that we passed, given the circumstances.
And it's still fluid as we talk here today toward the end of June. The numbers change daily, and I know Senator Thompson, when the session ended, told us that there's the possibility that things improve quicker than maybe we expected. We could maybe come back in and look at changing the budget if things go the other way. I mean, it's still very fluid, so it makes the job even harder to be the appropriations chair and be a senator and make a state budget. But you guys did a good job this year of adjusting and getting ready for next year too.
Well, thankfully, in the wisdom of Oklahoma's founders, there's a lot of areas where they fell short. The Constitution's way too long, way too prescriptive. But there was a provision in the Constitution, I don't know if it was added straight from the start or if it was added later, I'd have to do my research on that, but it requires a balanced budget. And I'm so thankful for that. It makes our job hard.
Right.
I've had to cut a lot since I've been here just to be able to make the budget balance. You hear on the federal level continuing resolutions where they don't actually pass a budget, they just keep funding at the same level. And they do that because it's really hard to come up with a budget given the circumstances. It's really hard to make tough decisions, but thankfully we don't have a choice here.
Right.
We have to balance the budget, and we do a really good job of balancing the needs. Across the board cut is really irresponsible, so going in and looking at each agency and trying to figure out how do we serve Oklahomans the best? It's hard work, but I'm glad that we have that provision of the Constitution. Glad we haven't tried to change that provision,
Right.
Because it makes us be much more prudent. But just like you're if you're in private business, you set out a budget for whatever your fiscal year is, and a lot of times you have to make adjustments throughout the year. So we'll probably have to make adjustments one way or another when we come back in session, but that's to be expected. And we did a very good job of working with the hand we were dealt. The Board of Equalization put out a $1.3 billion hole, and we still haven't gotten the backup data for that. We had to take their word for it, which was really frustrating.
It was. It was just frustrating. I'll just say that. And it was untraditional compared to what we're normally used to getting from the board and how they produced it. So
we're used to be able to see the modeling and
Right.
all of that,
Right.
which really helps us we can look our constituents in the eyes and say we did the best we could with the dollars and maximize them. This time, unfortunately, we weren't given the modeling, so we did the best we could with the information we were given, a little bit of information we were given.
That kind of leads me to the next topic. Is that something that you think Loft could help with?
I think Loft will be tremendously helpful in a number of areas. When you start something like that, you want to make sure they don't bite off more than they can chew.
Right.
We're off the ground. We hired a director, Mike Jackson, and he's going to do an awesome job. He's already ramped up on the hiring and getting some really qualified people in there. That's something they can absolutely help with in the long term. Short term, they can help around the edges, do some oversight. I'm very excited about what Mr. Jackson, former state representative Mike Jackson, is going to do. I think he's a really good hire, and I think that he's going to see Loft off to a very good start.
Yeah, with his experience, he knows he's familiar with the process and how it works here in Oklahoma, and he knows the questions to ask, having been a legislator. And as we've talked about a lot here on the podcast, sometimes you get a different story depending on who you talk to when you're talking about state spending or an agency's budget or something like that. So having a independent database source of information like Loft is going to be a game changer around here.
It will be, and it will be. One of the things when you have an organization like Loft is you can take it a million different directions, but you've got to be successful in your niche and make sure that you find what that niche is.
Right.
So really, program evaluation and helping us with our budget numbers are the two areas that they can really focus on and be successful. I know the speakers had meetings with Mr. Jackson, so have I, and I think we're both excited about the direction it's going.
Excellent. So now we're in the session despite the challenges and the unusual circumstances, it was good overall. We had good policy, had a tough budget, but managed our way through that. Let's talk a little bit the policy issues. Shortened session, but still able to get some good bills to the governor's desks directly related to COVID, some liability protections. We still were able to do non-COVID things, some healthcare reforms, education reforms, the cost of living adjustment, increase for pensioners. So a good session when it comes to policy.
Yeah, we were able to produce. And I told my caucus and I told the general public, I said, we're not just going to limit to COVID related. That will be a focus. But I said, why, if we're looking at legislation, we need to look at it for two-part test if it's going to advance. What problem are we trying to solve, and why does it need to be solved before what we call in here sine die, or the last day of session? And I think that's a really helpful exercise that will carry forward.
I think so, yeah.
That's something we should do every year.
It keeps your focus honed and on the target.
I know I won't mention legislator's name, but they told me they were really frustrated at me when I first said that. And then they put their list of bills down, and they said they grew frustrated with themselves a little bit because as they were going down, they're like, yeah, this isn't really necessary right now.
Right.
And you get caught up in that. You get requested from your constituents, and you want to be helpful. I mean, we all have servants' hearts, and we're all competitive, so we want to get our bills to the finish line.
Right.
But that really should be a measure. Why are we changing state law? Why does it need to be done now? And what problem we're trying to solve, I think, are questions that we should be asking ourselves every year.
We learned a lot this session. Some of them were how we change our processes. We talked about that with the virtual, but that's another good lesson that we learned here is that can hone our focus.
Just the importance of IT in everyday life. When I became pro tem, I transitioned us to Office 365 and remote servers, and I shudder to think what we would have done given the old IT infrastructure we had before when we first took over. And not that the previous guys were bad; they were doing the best they could. But I just saw a real importance of getting away from that. I saw the private sector doing that, and I asked the question, why are we not doing that? And IT really came through for us this year.
And I think one of the things, a bill we passed during the pandemic, which is really interesting, but was a temporary change to some of the open meeting laws that allowed state and local entities to hold meetings virtually. So like a city government or a county government could continue to operate, but not. This is when we were told not to gather in rooms of more than 2 people, and then you have a city council of 5 or 7 people or a county government. So we made that change and took things online. I heard great things about that. There may be some tweaks that need to be made, but again, to your point, how much technology impacts our life, and maybe also opens up and brings transparency into the way government operates and allows people to watch from the comfort of the living room, the city council or school board meeting or something.
I think that could be a long-term change if we do it right. We need to go back and see what was good about it, what was bad about it. Obviously, you had some Zoom bombing, which was awful for some state entities, but there's some safeguards you can put in there to protect against that. Overall, I think it was a home run as far as transparency on the process. I think one state board of education meeting, I think I hesitate to say the number, but there were a huge number of people watching.
Right, yeah.
And you just don't get that when you're in a boardroom and all that. I don't think it will ever replace face-to-face interaction, but it really brings some transparency. The media can watch multiple meetings at a time.
I talked to several reporters who said they were able to cover local government issues that they never would have had time to drive an hour to a town to go to the county courthouse to watch a meeting, and they could watch it online. And it resulted in some interesting, not from a bad perspective, but just, we learned more about that institution or that entity, and transparency is a good thing whenever you're spending taxpayer dollars at whatever level you are.
Well, the governments closest to the people have the most impact on their daily lives. Yeah. So, but obviously, too often they get the least amount of attention. And so I think it's a really important thing. Your school board, your city city council meetings, even task force that cities and schools put together, or county commissioners. Those type of things impact people's daily life and impact business. So I was excited. I really think that we've just seen the tip of the iceberg of what we can do with technology and opening up transparency.
I think so too. So right now we're in we call it the interim here. It's the off season, or the so to speak. So
weight training, run it now. I need to do that.
we all have our at-home workouts that we're doing. But so starting off light.
Speak for yourself.
It's a chance just practically speaking, it's a chance for you to spend more time with your family. Have you been able to do that? Get some time home with the kids and have some fun?
Yeah, I've been working remotely more often than I normally do. I still come to the Capitol quite a bit, but it's been a good deal. I work around my kids a lot. They're involved in campaigns and come up to the office, so it's not new for me. But it's been fun. Marissa, my wife, was working remotely, and those were, for all the bad things that came out of COVID, and I don't want to minimize those. A lot of people have lost their life, and a lot of businesses have had to shut their doors, and so there's some real devastating things. But the positive side is we've all been able to spend more time with our family, learn to cook a little bit more than usual.
Well, it's reminded us of maybe to slow down and to take some time to focus on our family, our friends, our loved ones, because too often we get fast-paced. Our schedules are jam-packed with work stuff, with kids' activities, or whatever it is we're involved in. So this was a chance for everyone to stop and be reminded to slow down and focus on what's truly important. So
yeah, technology's allowed us to do that, because just even a decade ago, it would have been very difficult to really work remotely very effectively. And I've been listening to a lot of radio programs and podcasts about how private sector is really looking at this and saying, hey, maybe it does make sense for us to have employees work from their home.
Yeah.
At least a partial part of the week or partial part of the month. And having people have offset schedules, so certain people, you don't have to have as much square footage, you don't have to have as much electricity, accommodation. So there's a lot of, from bad, there may be some good that comes out of it.
Yeah.
There will be some good that comes out of it. There's no doubt about it.
So even I said the word off season, but I don't want anyone at home to misunderstand. The Senate's 24/7, 365. So we're not in session, but our offices are still open, and we're still dealing with COVID-related issues. You and other senators were appointed by the governor to serve on a task force to look at how federal COVID relief dollars are being used, and so that's an important thing going on this off season.
Yeah, we've been meeting virtually and having some good discussions there, and as we film this, June 23rd, I believe, right?
Yep,
today.
it's 23rd.
I just got done talking to the appropriations chairman. We're looking at numbers. We're looking at budget. So when I talk about the budget process being a year-round, that's a lot more than just rhetoric. That is the absolute truth. Now, things change sometimes toward the end of session because you get new information.
Right.
But literally, June 23rd of 2020, I'm sitting down talking to Roger Thompson, my appropriations chair, the Senate appropriations chair, I should say, about what is FY22's budget going to look like, and what are the numbers looking like, what are the collections looking like. It's something that we take very seriously.
For sure. And we're dealing with constituent issues, and we're helping as best we can. I know a lot of people out there are frustrated with some of the things going on at the Employment Security Commission, but our office, I know I've overheard and listened, we were able to have some success stories with people finally getting their cases resolved, so that's a nonstop thing here.
It's frustrating to me too. The federal government passed the CARES Act, and they did the PPP for private business, and they did the PUA for pandemic unemployment assistance. Mm-hmm. And I've had a lot of constituents in Senate District 47 not be able to get the help they need, and they've been paying into the system, but it's a hard job. OESC has been dealing with records amount of fraud. Not just OESC, but Oklahoma Employment Securities Commission, but entities like theirs across the United States. There's a theme. We didn't come up with a theme before we did this, but it's IT. They were operating off Cobalt, and late 80s, early 90s
Right.
technology.
Right.
And you just can't turn that on a dime. We had put some money in that 3 years ago, but they have not ramped up the IT increase. That is extremely important, and this is underscored and emphasized and magnified how important it is. It can cut down on fraud, but it can also get checks out to people who really need it.
Yeah.
I'm getting calls in this office about people who have their electricity may be cutting off, although a lot of utilities are working with people. Their internet's going to be cut off, and that's their means of work right now.
Right.
That they're literally they're having to go to the food pantry for the first time in their life to be able to get groceries for their family. People are hurting, and that's not lost on me. And so I appointed Senator James Lee Wright for Creek County to oversee the Senate reaction, and he's been working very closely with my office and other senators to try to help. There's a backlog, though, and we want to help, and I think OESC has some new leadership now. Hopefully we get it on track, but it's simply unacceptable the way that it was running, and I'm glad that the governor's taken action to make some changes over there.
Right.
We've got to serve the public, and these businesses have been paying that unemployment insurance on these people for a long time. Those people who rightfully deserve it need it, and I can't believe there's people in this world that are taking advantage of that situation and preying on the system right now.
It happens every time, and it shouldn't surprise us, but it still does, because you would think who would take advantage of...
Surprise is the wrong word. It angers me,
Yeah.
because I hear and I read these messages from these families, people who have never needed a dime of government assistance in their life, who, through no fault of their own, are out of work right now. Some of these people are self-employed. They were photographers. They were playwriters, screenwriters, attorneys, every walk of life, and accountants. I've seen a lot of people who have never interacted with their state government before having to, and it's been a less than desirable experience. And it's not to defame the people working at OESC. They had to ramp up. They didn't have enough people for the normal volume, and their IT system was in the dark ages, and we've got to get that fixed.
Yeah, I think all across the board, we have to be forward-thinking and looking to the future, what we can do with what we have to prepare and get better. That's something that we have internally here as a culture, as the Senate, is how can we constantly improve. We're trying to make investments as we can. You mentioned the IT upgrades, things like that. So just people need to think about that, and especially when you're in an important role like that at a time like this.
Well, we started investing in new IT, I think, in 2017.
Yeah, it takes a while to pay
for that entity. It's just, it doesn't turn on a dime, and it frustrates me.
It frustrates us that it is not as nimble as we need it to be and want it to be.
Yeah,
but I think
no one could have foreseen the volume that we're having.
But I think you hit it on the head, that there are people working hard to change it as quick as they can. It will take time. But
Senator Lee Wright and his assistant Cheryl are working long hours trying to help our constituents across the state. So is my EA Christina, and EAs for all the members. It's really all hands on deck scenario.
Mm-hmm. Same thing in the House, I've heard.
Oh yeah.
So if you're listening at home and you're still having issues, reach out to your state senator. You can go to oksenate.gov and input your address and find out who represents you, and send them an email or call them, and they'll be more than willing to help you sort through the process. The last thing I wanted to touch on quickly as far as the off season was something we call Interim Studies around here at the legislature. The members of the Senate have until Friday, July 10th, to submit their interim study requests.
Let that be a warning. Friday, July 10th, members.
All the members listening. And then the Pro Tem's office will make announcements no later than 2 weeks after that on where the study requests have been assigned to which committee. And then all studies have to be completed by Friday, October 30th, which is the last Friday before the general election this fall. But interim studies are a way for senators to dive deeper in the issues. You found them helpful in your career as a member of the Senate, so it's an interesting. It's a good way for members just to learn more about.
Senate Bill 1, Loft came out of an interim study.
Success story right there.
Yeah, success story. Not everyone is like that. Sometimes you got an interim study and realize the problem you're trying to solve isn't a problem at all, or you identified the wrong problem.
Mm-hmm.
But these are extremely important. They get assigned to a committee much like a bill does.
Mm-hmm.
And then that committee chair, much like a bill, gets to choose if they're going to hear or not hear that interim study. The best interim studies are those that bring in both sides of the equation.
Right.
You see sometimes interim studies where it's just a one-sided affair where they just talk about all the merits of whatever their idea is. I don't operate that way. I operate in such a manner that I like people to be able to poke holes in my ideas so I can improve my idea. And I think most members are that way.
Iron sharpens iron, right?
Absolutely. And so we're in the process of collecting those. A few have been submitted already.
Do you think there'll be some studies related to COVID or other issues we've experienced this year? What's your expectation?
I anticipate myself doing something on the open meetings and seeing if there's something more permanent we can do there. But I think there will be. COVID, it's interesting because the pandemic, you couldn't foresee that pandemic, but health problems are foreseeable.
Mm-hmm.
Natural disasters are foreseeable. We had a working group that keeps an up-to-date document. I think we need to go back and see, was that helpful? Did it get used? I don't know if it's this interim because we're still in the thick of it. We need to study that at some point in the near future, and that may be something we can get Loft to do as well. The de-escalation tactics by police officers, I anticipate with the national movement, the national sentiment around social justice and those things, I think that will probably elicit a few interim study requests. I'm interested in some of those topics.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to see what, there's people are talking about cattle prices and the beef market, and there's a myriad of issues, and that's one of the beauties of a legislative body is where my expertise ends, someone else may begin. I don't know the first thing about the meat market and the beef market other than what I read in the papers.
Right.
But we have a wealth of knowledge in this body and across the state to be able to help us do those interim studies.
Well, we'll have more on that a little bit later when the studies are submitted and assigned and announced. I wasn't truthful earlier. I said that would be the last thing.
Uh-oh, liar.
We can't let any podcast or anything go by without talking about the census and how important that is. I don't have the latest figures here, but maybe if you talk a little bit about the census, I can find our response rate here. Pro Tim, why is the census
once
important?
a decade? No, the census is extremely important. It impacts our federal money that comes down in the form of matching money and grants to the state, to our education system, to our local governments, to transportation. Oklahoma has historically underperformed on the number of people submitting their census form, and that adversely impacts your representation in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it adversely impacts the amount of money that gets allocated, both at the federal level, and we use those numbers as we allocate at the state level as well.
So thank you for that.
Did I belabor enough?
I did. You did. Great. You stretched. I appreciate it. So we're recording on Tuesday, June 23rd. These numbers change every day because new numbers come in, but the national average response rate is 61.6%.
The national average?
The national.
Okay.
Oklahoma's average response rate today is 56%. We rank 43rd among all the states.
We can do better than that.